And joining us in studios, Tsepo Khadima, political analyst. Adil Nchabeleng is Transform RSA president. And we have Kenny Kunene, the chairperson of Weekly Expose. Good evening to you, gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us. I'll just say this is long overdue, considering the murmurings and concerns that the minister allegedly would want to dip into the PIC's finances to save SOEs. We'll start with you, Khadima.
Yeah, we have to bear in mind, why is this important? The Public Investment Corporation is the largest money manager on the continent of Africa, with the assets, as you say, 1.86 trillion rand or 2 trillion rand, as some people are saying. But we also have to bear in mind that PIC does not, out of its own, manage all of that money on its own. There's a substantial amount of money that has got fiduciaries that are acting on its behalf. And we have to lament the fact that as the list will be published, we'll find that the majority of those are white-owned asset managers, could be the likes of Old Mutual investment managers, Sanlam, Investec, Coronation, Allen Gray, and so the list goes on. And I think I've previously spoken about the fact that Trevor Manuel is in the line of fire. He chairs, he used to oversee Public Investment Corporation. They put a lot of money into Old Mutual asset managers, and Ntantla with Allen Gray. A lot of money is managed by Allen Gray from PIC. So that is the one thing that it will reveal. And of course, we also have to bear in mind as to, well, is that actually an optimal return? But very important, Cindy, is that all of these asset managers I'm talking about, which will generally be white asset managers, they have two things. First is that they've got a prescription where up to 25% of their funds under management or assets under management can be invested offshore. And I'm saying that is the biggest drawback, and most certainly I think that's where the biggest loss is accounted for, because that 25% of all funds under management, including PIC's money, which would be on as a fiduciary, is never accounted for. The next thing is that in terms of the rules of the funds, there is 2% of discretionary investment. So these asset managers who are white, they never, for that 2% of discretionary investment, ever account or actually invest it responsibly to advance radical economic transformation projects or transactions of that nature. So that's really where we have to pay attention. Over and above that, PIC out of its own, 10% of the 1.86 trillion or the 2 trillion, we have to bear in mind that they've got the money, a prescription of 10% is offshore, 5% within the continent of Africa, and 5% outside. So when you look at the returns, you have to ask many questions. So if anything, we should welcome that the full disclosure of this, not only for the purpose of trying to find out, well, who's the beneficiary, but also asking the hard questions. Are we having value for money on that investment, and why is our economy not growing at the rate that it should grow, taking into account that also somewhere between 6% or 11%, depending on who you talk to, of PIC's funds under management are invested directly in the JSE, and we have seen in recent days and recent years a docile, timid PIC, which is no longer an activist shareholder that it used to be during the time of Brian Molefe, whose main achievement, transformation at Sasol, had never had a director rather, and Imogen Mkhize was appointed director of Sasol because of the activism of a shareholder such as PIC.
Yeah, and Kenny, you're sitting there, and this is something you publish in the Weekly Expose with regards to, number one, the forensic reports that had been conducted previously and whether due process was followed in advertising, etc. Moreover than that, what is likely beyond where the money is spent and value for money is going on in the PIC according to your investigation?
Let me congratulate the minister for this bold step. If you are serious about fighting corruption, the first step will be transparency. And I know that he's been criticized for taking the step because those in the mainstream media and those who own the economy are afraid that they will be exposed, that they have been taking pensions money to actually establish businesses and price them heavily and get money from the same people that they are using their money to build those businesses. That's number one. Number two, the first document we got was the KPMG report, which spelled out lack of governance, lack of authority, accountability. And myself and Steve Motale, at the time, he was not employed. He was still fighting with the Citizen. He was assisting me to establish this institution, Weekly Expose. We went to meet with Dr. Dan Machila at PIC and to interrogate the findings of this report. And I must say that we were not impressed. He was very defensive. The report, he did not deny some of the things that the report highlighted, but he tried to justify them. Number one, when the report was commissioned by Pravin Gordhan, and according to Dan Machila, Pravin Gordhan commissioned that report without following procurement procedures. In fact, according to Machila, Pravin Gordhan instructed Vuyo Jack and a certain Sehola, who were board members at the time, and the wife of Sehola, from what he said, worked at KPMG at the time. Pravin instructed them that the KPMG must commission this report. He himself told us that he did not recognize that report, and that is why he did not implement the recommendations of the report. And we asked him as to who paid for the report. And he said he fought the payment, however, and we said, how do you account for it? He said it will be accounted for as wasteful expenditure. And then we said to him, which means you have failed in your fiduciary duties to protect the funds of PIC. However, we had a very long conversation. But subsequent to that, we had other information that came our way about the corruption that was happening at PIC, at the watch, and at the leadership of Dan Machila. The main one being the one of the Mozambican deal, whereby he actually kicked out a young man, an Indian boy, Mirza, who introduced the deal to PIC, and then ended up having a relationship with the owner of SNS oil refinery in Mozambique, which, according to the information that we have, and the journalists that decided to contact us from Mozambique, is not operational. And we sent questions to Mr. Machila based on the information that we had. He responded until at a point when we indicated to him that the person that he has been doing business with, I'm just finishing, has just been arrested for money laundering, currency manipulation, tax fraud, and so on in Mozambique. And by the way, we presented him with a press statement from the authorities in Mozambique. So there's big corruption happening there.
But sorry to interrupt you, but can this corruption be squarely laid on the leadership of Dr. Machila, because he has almost insinuated that this is a personal attack or witch hunt on his person?
The reason it is laid on him is not only him. There are also allegations of the CFO, which will be published next week, from one of the whistleblowers who actually gave his name out. But also the board, the way the board was structured, the previous ministers, from Trevor, Pravin, and Nene. In fact, Machila said to us, to myself and Mr. Motale, that Pravin controlled Nene when he left. Nene executed the instructions of Pravin. And he, Machila, refused to listen to Nene because he knew that those instructions came from Pravin. And Machila told us of how corrupt Pravin was and how he refused to be part of that corruption.
Yeah, but I mean, this is only, for me, it seems, the tip of the iceberg, because in the IFMS report and the involvement of Treasury and allowing certain companies, the big four auditors, to have tentacles in all government structures, even cascading down to municipal level, it's very concerning. And yet the impression that you are given, or the narrative, is that the PIC is being manipulated by the minister for personal interests or political gain.
In terms of, look, one of the beautiful things that is actually emerging in South Africa is there is now a different dialogue, one of accountability, one of transparency, one of fairness, and one of taking responsibility when people are appointed into positions. It is a trend that is actually going to now start dominating government and business within the government sphere. We have a minister who has now issued out publicly a letter which is directed to a deputy minister who acts as a chairperson of a PIC board right now. Within that chairperson, he says to him that it has come to my attention that there are certain issues that needs to be aired out publicly and get to be known. One, with regards to the PIC itself, the Public Investment Corporation, which manages funds as well as monies and pensions on behalf of workers. And some of the workers, by the way, are already on retirement, which is government and public workers. So he says, I want to know what has transpired in the last 2 to 3 years within the PIC as a corporation. Who has been benefiting? Who has been given funding? How has this funding been dispersed? On what criteria and everything? If you were to look at the particular letter, we have to first start by saying we congratulate Minister Gigaba, one, of being bold. And the second thing is we want to say that the step cannot just end by saying we want to know, is he has to now start giving us specifications as to when and what would be expecting out of that particular report. If they can start revealing as to who are the South African PIC beneficiaries, people who have been enjoying a lot of money coming out of the PIC, being funded, being given all sorts of financial help, and as to which are the consortiums and the politically connected individuals that have actually been benefiting out of this particular process of actually riding the PIC gravy train right up to the point that we are in. There is a lot of complaints that PIC has not been funding people. There's a lot of complaints that have come to us as Transform RSA that says that PIC has been stealing deals from people. If you take a proposal to PIC today, the likelihood of that proposal succeeding and you being funded on that particular proposal is slim, because internally within PIC, there are committees that controls decision making, and within that committees they have influential people who will take that particular proposal and go and counter you in the particular market. So this is a bold step. We want to know as South Africans, and we want to see transformation happening, and as a result there must be an opening of accounts.
Yes, I'm not taking away the significance of the minister's intervention in venting out what's been going on at the PIC, but the issue is we've seen executives get away with impunity where there hadn't been any punishment or convictions for that matter. So what will this particular forensic do with its outcome?
Well, I think the very nature of it, or what should be expected out of it, is to make a finding of fact as to who is implicit and who has had a dereliction of duty that can therefore be charged. But I would expect that, I think if there are any charges, particularly on where there is a clear case of misappropriation of funds, that there should be prosecution. And in fact, if anything, the minister will then, or even the PIC board, will be duty bound to do so. Well, obviously, I mean, one would have expected that the board should have, on its own accord, in reviewing its processes, and particularly with the new chairperson in place, have had to initiate this process. But we congratulate Minister Malusi Gigaba. I think it's a bold step, and I've said it before that he must stop accounting for the luggage he didn't pack. And this is certainly that of ensuring that he can be able to know what is in that luggage. Now, what Mr. Kunene is mentioning here, for example, the SNS refinery, I think that has been in the public domain for a while. What is astonishing for me is that in this world of technology, Mr. Machila has just simply not taken a video footage from his cell phone of the plant that he invested, we made to understand, almost R1 billion into. Now, if you look at $83 million that has been invested in such a plant, I'm sure you could have taken a picture or two of what exactly he invested in. So is that a tip of an iceberg? Now, if we look at it, for example, there are other transactions that are more contentious. The investment in Distel, Johan Rupert's Distel, again, there as to who are the ultimate beneficiaries in that BEE transaction, which we are made to understand that PIC bankrolled that, and the decision that led to that. And also in other instances, I would hope that this inquiry will, I mean, I look at their capital structure. No one funder would take 100% exposure on any transaction. And we would want to know as who are the other co-funders and co-equity holders in the various transactions that PIC participated in, because if we find that they were the only one who took 100% exposure in any one investment, that would, if anything, cost us more sleepless nights, because it would mean that most of the investment, pensioners' monies, would effectively be written down.
But the timing, though, you know, if you're saying that this is information that's not necessarily exclusive, so to speak, why is the minister only calling for a probe now?
But the minister has just been appointed not too long ago.
No, granted, but I mean, why
Yes.
hasn't anything happened prior? I mean, everything borders on what motivates it. Why is it urgent now?
I think the minister, having realized, if you look at his letter, he also says the forensic investigation must take cognizance of what is in the public domain. And I think it is because of allegations of corruption, also Dan Machila getting a lot of coverage from one media group, which you then question what is their interest. But coming to this, the Mozambican deal, one of the questions, a leaked document was sent to us, whereby the person that Mr. Machila told us that they had paid him an introduction fee, wrote a letter to PIC demanding $2 million plus US that the PIC owes him, because this man says in the letter that is written by his lawyers to PIC, to Dan Machila, that Dan Machila became part of a meeting between him and his client. And Dan Machila reduced the amount of $10 million, which he had agreed with his client, for the client to pay him, to $3 million US. But he was only paid 400,000 plus thousand US. Now, so this is a legal matter. And the lawyer has responded to us to say, if they don't respond in 7 days, he will be taking further steps. That's the first one. Now, it baffles me that the board, a few weeks ago, had confidence in this man. When there's a legal document that has been presented to him and that is in the public domain, that says you interfered in a private transaction, what is your interest? And there are allegations of an institution that does not operate, a refinery that does not operate. The owner of the refinery is an underworld character in Mozambique. Yet the board has not even taken a decision to send its people to that refinery and see if it's operational or not. None of that has happened. And I think these are the things that made the minister to institute this type of action. Now, talking about politically connected, one of the questions that myself and Mr. Mutali placed to Dr. Dan Machila was, the information that we have is that Symphony Capital, a company that is also transacting with PIC, got business from PIC without following procurement processes. And the sources, the allegations are, this company is a front of Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who is the treasurer of the ANC. These were allegations that were put to us and we put to him. He said he was not aware that this company was linked to Dr. Mkhize. However, yes, indeed, they gave Symphony Capital business without following procurement process because they were desperate. So he did not deny those allegations. All that he said was they were desperate. So there's a lot that is happening at PIC, and we at Weekly Expose, the journalists investigate, they interrogate, and then they write. However, since we asked the questions, deep questions pertaining to the Mozambican deal, bearing in mind that Weekly Expose called the owner of Mozambique. When he had the PIC deal, he then said he does not know how to speak English. When he has answered in English, then he said he must be called in 30 minutes. He never replied. So there is something there. So I'm happy that the minister has said, let all transactions be made public. I hope that the minister is not going to chicken out, because now what white monopoly capital and its mainstream media does is to go for you and to try and make you turn around. We have seen our politicians, our ministers doing a U-turn on very critical decisions that are very bold. I hope that Minister Gigaba will stick with this one. And by the way, he has given the timelines for the terms of reference for the forensic audit, the 23rd of October. I think he must also give a deadline for making all transactions and shareholders and directors of companies that have done business with PIC. He must also give a deadline to that, including fund managers.
So besides the deliberate attempt at keeping smaller players or even the lack of transformation in these transactions, the scandal or even the accusations in itself, what has the response been from the PIC in trying to either explain or even to account?
The response is always dismissive. There is a deal also of Sakwel. By the way, Sakwel is owned by a family of the Musenekes, from the information that we have. And we have interrogated this.
Tito Mboweni is actually the chair of Sakwel. So.
Yes. So we have interrogated this deal. There's a Gobodo investigation, forensic investigation that was done. They were dismissive when it comes to it. And they told us that this was dealt with in Parliament. You see, when people go to Parliament, they explain, and the parliamentarians, unfortunately, some of them are very lazy to read. So they accept whatever that they've been told. But when you look at the facts and you read the Gobodo recommendations, Gobodo recommended that criminal charges must be laid. PIC did nothing under the leadership of Machila. So why is he protecting people like Madavo, who was singled out in the Gobodo report as the person that must be that must account when it comes to the Sakwel deal?
But again, should it be just the management or the Dr. Machila and the board that falls in this case? No. You referred to people that are politically exposed. This could have negative consequences for those that unwittingly may have found themselves in some transaction as part of a consortium and only to find that the big guns are the ones that walk away with the loot.
I don't think the minister is aiming at actually targeting consortiums that were actually funded. That is a different matter. He's actually looking at the transparency aspect of it, accountability, and aspect of saying that public officials, in this case being a PIC public official, Dan Machila, should at some level come out openly and say, listen, my responsibility came up to this point. If there were things that happened in my account and I wasn't aware, let me recuse myself and actually be clear about it. This is what I know, this is what I don't know. But the names of who has benefited is already in the bank. I mean, PIC is a corporation that knows every day who it has funded, who is sitting with its money, and at what level are they getting the return of their investment on all of these things. But what is critical and important is South Africa is now moving into a trajectory right now of now coming up with mechanisms and means. We have now Treasury that has taken a step. It has instructed Minister Buthelezi, who is the PIC chair, to say, please bring us this report and please do not give us excuses. So we expect Minister Buthelezi to expedite this process of actually getting this information, making it available in terms of reporting it to the minister. It must be made available to the public to scrutinize so that we know who benefits how and how they've actually been enjoying these particular funds and at what levels. Remember, some of them have been receiving trenches of funding over more than once, and as to what was the criteria for them to be funded more than once. So this is not something small. This is something big, and we know that it already looks like this is the Titanic. One part of the Titanic is already crashing within the iceberg on the underneath. The aspect of it is still going to come out.
I want to immerse myself in all this literature. I see, Kenny, you really went out of your way, including the tracking numbers of certain transactions, the response from those that are implicated, Attorney General in the province, or rather in Mozambique, etc. When do we actually get this in a concentrated format, in a readable format?
You go to weeklyexpose.co.za. every document that we have, we attach. We write the story, we attach the document, we give the reply of PIC or Dan Machila or whoever. Talking about if Dan should be the only one, just before Pravin Gordhan was going to be reshuffled, exactly a week before, Pravin wrote a memo on a Friday. And on a Wednesday, the PIC board had a workshop. I'm just finishing. They had a workshop. In that workshop, the deputy chair at the time of PIC, Rashad Morar, introduced this memo from Pravin, which actually wanted to do amendments to the MOI. These amendments meant to, we also wrote that article, it's on Weekly Expose, meant to make sure that the incoming deputy minister does not become the deputy chair of PIC. Number two, it sought to extend the term of the board members because their term was ending. So it sought to extend it by 3 years.
Yeah, we're going to have to refer our viewers to go to weeklyexpose.co.za in the interest of time, and to our guests, thanks so much for trying to make sense of what's going on and the murkiness of it, all the what seems to be underhanded behavior in the PIC and the beneficiaries and investors thereof. Tsepo Kadima is a political analyst, Adil Nchabeleng is president of Transform RSA, and Kenny Gunene is the chairman of Weekly Expose. So let us know, and we'll continue the debate on social media. For now, though, quick break. We'll see you shortly.
Okay.